All right, we are almost through the first week of September. We got Steve Greenfield. He's back at his house after being in Indy. We're talking about dealers' outlook, Japan's EV push, and the OG Mustang.
Everywhere I go, the people really want to know.
Little Jay Leno coming in the show this morning. How was it yesterday? We didn't get any feedback. Nobody guessed where you were. Unbelievable.
Oh, is that right? Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, it's on the Indianapolis Super Speedway. And if you haven't been up there to see a race, you got to get there to see a race. They were doing the autonomous vehicles. And these vehicles now will average that track at 180 miles an hour without a driver.
You're kidding me.
Yeah. So they take one of the Indy class vehicles, race cars, and it's where the driver is. They put a bunch of computers and electronics in. And while they did have a crash the day before, so they wiped out a couple of the cars, so they still do crash. But,
Wow.
It'll be interesting. I was talking to some of the guys that work there and say it's not too long from now where the autonomous cars will be faster than the human drivers, because just from a consistency
They're
standpoint,
so aware.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, they'll figure out the track and the ideal line, and then they'll just be consistent. Every single lap will be exactly the same, which I think will be boring for the people watching. But in terms of doing lap times, these autonomous cars may actually start lapping faster than humans, which is sad. Like if you're an F1, fan, it's like, imagine like a robot out there beating, Verstappen or something.
Just crushing. Yeah. That's really interesting. Like the value of human error. I'm a big sports guy, and the more and more we get even VAR or like a video reviews introduced, or automated reviews. I love soccer where they can just like tell within inches whether or not someone's offsides, and that a camera calls it or a goal happens. It's like there's a little bit of value in human error that I think we have as a society that says like, you know what, there's a push and pull to being a human, and that's okay. So really interesting. That kind of is a good segue into, you've got to check out, we posted yesterday on our LinkedIn profile, on our social media profiles, a little behind the scenes. If you don't know everything that goes into creating a podcast, getting the guests there, all of that, our producer Nathan, when we were on the ground at NAMAD, did a little vlog, gave his insights. He produces all, I think, 6 of our shows right now, 7 and 8 coming out. We've got a little podcast expert there. I don't know if he put that together on the show today. That's a little tongue in cheek from him, but
let me, while you're on Nathan, I mean, he does a lot of this work behind the scenes. If you haven't met Nathan, he's like literally one of the nicest guys in automotive. So try to make it a point to find him at one of these conferences coming up and meet him. I mean, just a genuinely nice dude.
Agree. Yeah. Just a good guy. We celebrate him. We celebrate him a lot around here. All right, let's get into it this morning. A little bit different tone than the celebration, but franchise dealers are growing a bit more pessimistic going into Q3. Cox Automotive poll revealed concerns about interest rates, the economy, and the election uncertainty, of course. Dealer sentiment index fell below 50 for only the 3rd time in its 7-year history, indicating negative expectations for the near future. Dealers rated their 3-month outlook at 49, down from 52 the previous quarter. The top concerns, obviously, interest rates, economy, and political uncertainty. There's also just a variance from what Cox Automotive and Jonathan Smoke, who we both know well, has been talking about, where the demand for vehicles says the SAR should be around 17 million. However, looks like it's going to still sit at about 15.4 million even after August. Smoke said, to say that profits are today worse than they were before, I think, is thinking beyond new vehicle gross margins and thinking about other expenses that dealers have that are still being impacted by inflation and higher costs and higher interest rates, which make it very expensive to hold inventory. So it's not just profits down, it's margins down altogether because of holding costs.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting times. I mean, gross per car, front end and back end, have been drifting down. If you've been tracking that, which means dealers are making less profit overall. And you look at the profitability per rooftop too, it's down and continues to track down. We're still way above pre-COVID levels, right? So dealers should be happy there. But if dealers are looking at the last 2 years and saying, oh my goodness, every quarter my margins are slowly but surely drifting down for all the reasons that you said and you recounted from Jonathan Smoke. There's no relief in sight here. New car inventories are mounting. They're going to continue to mount. And the OEMs are coming in over the top with incentives to help dealers move the vehicles, but at the same time, the margins are getting skinnier. And then you throw in it being an election year and all the uncertainty. Frankly, I think no matter who's in the White House, nothing's really going to significantly change for dealers. But there is that uncertainty, and hopefully we get a little bit of a blip upwards in both confidence from dealers, but also confidence from consumers after the dust settles, after the election, consumers get back to buying, et cetera. But for the time being, I think if I'm a dealer, just realize, we're getting back to a post-COVID normal in terms of profitability. And if the costs are inflated, you better get them under control, because don't expect that we're going to get back to these higher margins anytime soon.
Yeah, one of the things that your fund actually has been targeting for a long time that you and I have talked about is finding places where automation can reduce expenses, whether it be with AI tools or with tools that allow humans to do more of the work that only humans can still do, which is something that I think every dealer should be looking at when it comes to margin compression is how do I automate some of the high cost, whether it be on personnel or high cost on time, so that I can leverage the humans that I have, typically the first largest expense line, that I can leverage them to do the things that they absolutely do best. So I appreciate that your fund is after that. And I know that there are a lot of software companies that are working toward that as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, 80% of a dealer's cost structure are humans paying humans.
Yep.
And, I think the promise of AI in the short term is more of this co-pilot concept where you've got, a helper that helps increase productivity, no matter what the role at the dealership, right? There should be some persistent helper that's augments their intelligence, makes them a little smarter, makes them a little faster, gives them the data they need when they need it for their tasks and duties to do a little bit more productivity. Phase 2 of AI and the promise, we aren't there yet for automotive, will be more of an agent, which can work while you're sleeping, basically, right? Double your effectiveness, triple your effectiveness, and then ultimately remove humans from the equation entirely when that agent gets trained up and is good enough. So I think in the short term, if I'm a dealer, I'd be looking more into the first bucket, what tools can I get, or pushing my existing vendors to say, how do I increase productivity or yield per employee today? That's what you should be focused on the first time. Forget replacing humans for the time being, but I think we're going to see this wave of innovation. And to your point, we're looking at some of these companies that can just sort of help your employees get smarter, faster, better, and therefore you can be doing more work with fewer humans.
Yep. Speaking of doing a little bit more work.
Stop. Segue.
Time.
So Japan is heavily investing in a bit more work on their electric vehicle battery supply chain, offering up to $2.4 billion, which is 350 billion yen in subsidies. The funding will boost production for companies like Toyota, Nissan, Mazda, Subaru, Panasonic, aiming to increase the nation's storage battery capacity by 50%. The combined investment from the four automakers, along with Japanese government subsidies, is totaling over $6.58 billion. So Toyota is obviously leading Japan's EV battery push, not just for full battery electric vehicles, but for their hybrids, and developing their next gen solid state batteries. Subaru and Mazda also are partnering with Panasonic for cylindrical lithium ion battery production, while Nissan plans to produce lithium ion phosphate batteries for mini EVs by 2028. Ken Saito, Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, stated, "We hope these efforts will strengthen Japan's battery industry." So batteries coming out of Japan, not just the US, going to continue to press the EV landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I think this may be a case of too little, too late. The Chinese over a decade ago made these huge strategic bets to lock up the inputs to batteries, critical mining assets, the ability to refine. They refine more than 90% of all the battery components on the face of the earth, build up competency in building batteries, and then, as we've seen recently, build up competency in building really high quality, low price EVs. So as Japan's looking at this, and I believe that 9 of the top 10 battery manufacturers in the world are Chinese. It's going to be really hard for them to throw a few $1 billion at this and fix the problem, because China has very methodically locked up all of these resources. So hopefully goodness comes of this, and Japan can get more independence, because it's a dangerous situation where you got Chinese effectively taking over a lot of the markets in the world with exports of really good, high quality, low price, either EVs or ICE vehicles. Japan's going to be looking at this and saying, this puts us in a precarious position. But I don't know, by throwing a couple of $1 billion at the battery supply chain, it's going to make much of a dent in Chinese dominance.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, everybody's kind of after this, we want to be the producer, including the US. But like you said, a 10-year head start is a pretty dang big head start.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt.
Speaking of a few years.
Stop.
Segue.
Time.
You're going to want to check out the trip down memory lane that Bill Ford and Jay Leno took in a classic piece of automotive's history. In relation to the fact that, Steve, you were at the Indy 500, it's kind of cool. They took out the original pace car from the 1964 Indianapolis 500. This car was built in the first hour of Mustang production, and Bill Ford recently became its 4th owner after a friend spotted it at a show. Bill's uncle, Benson Ford Sr., drove the pace car in the 1964 Indy 500, making it the first time many people ever saw a Mustang. Interestingly enough, Jay Leno in it shared a personal story about how Bill Ford's uncle, Henry Ford II, helped him get a job back at a dealership. And then after being fired for dropping hubcaps, Jay Leno wrote to Ford explaining his family's loyalty to Ford vehicles and his desire to own a Mustang one day. 2 weeks later, the dealership owner reinstated Leno, saying, "I don't know who you know in Detroit, but you got your job back." So Jay has a little bit of Ford blood in him for sure.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, when you think about iconic brands in automotive, well, I'll ask you, how many brands have been relevant now for like 60 years that are still in high production volumes today? I mean, Mustang is one of them. I would argue Corvette is another one. But beyond that, I can't think of another brand that is doing significant volume today that is as relevant now as when it was introduced like 60 years ago.
No, at least not model, right? Potentially a couple makes, right? But model.
Oh yeah, for sure. But models that have had this kind of staying power and relevancy. Although there were years in the 70s when those Mustangs were pretty pathetic and ugly and small displacement, and those ones have not become collectibles yet, and I don't know that they ever will. So, but it was a bad decade for cars in general, with oil embargoes and things. But beyond that, I mean, I think that the Mustang's brand with consumers is as strong as it was, when it got introduced 60 years ago. It's amazing.
Yeah, you look at that, and you look at like Ford being kind of the ones to really be, and obviously because of the executive's leadership desire to kind of talk about EVs, but this muscle car history is definitely deeply entrenched in who they are and what Ford has brought to kind of the American feeling. We talked yesterday about like whether or not, an electric vehicle going around a track actually gets people out to the track because of the sound not being there. But yeah, you think about, a Ford Mustang starting up, and what that sounds like, so kind of cool. You're going to want to check out the video if you haven't. Do it. It's a good one for auto, just because, whether you're a Subaru or a Mazda or a Ford person, it has a little something for you. So.
Very cool. Love it.
Well, that's all the time we got for today. Thanks for hanging out with me the second half of this week, Steve. Hey, you got a good weekend ahead of you. First weekend in September. Make the best of it. See you next week.